And so we go to Washington, D.C. and invite Brother Benito Wheatley, Special Envoy of the BVI government and the Premier's Advisor on International Relations, with particular focus on the UK, EU, and the United Nations. Territory's former Chief Diplomat and Director of the BVI London office, BVI CARICOM Ambassador, a Continuing Policy Fellow at the Centre for Science and Policy at the University of Cambridge in the UK. Benito Wheatley holds a Master's of Science degree in Diplomacy and International Strategy from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science from Morehouse College in the United States. I want to say a very warm welcome to Benito Wheatley. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good, my brother. A pleasure to join you.
All right. Lots of things happening, man. Lots of things happening. Firstly, I want to start with the whole UN Decolonization Committee's report on the BVI. And if you may just share with us some of the key recommendations coming out of that report. We'll be very much interested to hear your thoughts on some of those recommendations, the key ones, some of the key ones you're able to pick out.
Yes, Keith. The UN Special Committee on Decolonization, also referred to as the C24, conducted a visiting mission to the BVI last year in August to assess the progress of decolonization on the ground and to gather people's views. So the people had a full opportunity to express their thoughts on where things are as it stands now as an OT, and also their views on self-determination. The UN took that feedback and has published a report that reflects the people's views. And there are also a number of recommendations that the UN has made based on the views expressed by the people of the BVI. So number one, they have recommended an education program. This is to help people better understand the various aspects of their options for independence or integration or free association. So more information is needed there. Also, they have suggested that there is an independence timetable that's established because they believe the BVI is ready for that step. They've also recommended a discussion with the administering power, who is the UK, to ensure that there is a balanced approach to self-determination, next steps, and perhaps even a UN-appointed arbitrator to assist in those discussions. And then finally, there's a recommendation to consider whether a referendum is needed to actually take a step toward independence, or whether this can be the mandate of a political party going into an election. So those are the 4 recommendations, Keith.
How involved do you, or the sense you get of BVI landers' interest involvement in going to the next level? Self-determination. What's your sense? I know you're in Washington and you've been out of the state for some periods from time to time, but you are in direct contact. How involved do you think the folks in the BVI are, or even enthused about going to that next step and the preparations for that next step?
Yes, Keith. Well, I am posted in Washington, and prior to that, I was in the UK. But I visit the territory regularly because I have to advise on international affairs matters. And while I'm on the ground, I do take a temperature of where things are. But the people of the BVI, I believe, understand that we have been on a journey of self-determination since 1949, when we had the Great March, where the people protested colonial neglect by the British Empire. And then in 1950, we had the restoration of our Legislative Council, which began the process of self-governance. So we have made great strides since then. It's been 7 decades, and people understand that we have to continue on that path. The question is simply, what next step do we take? in achieving a full measure of self-government. And that is why the UN has recommended an education campaign so that the public can understand the various options and then take steps accordingly.
Let's look at some wider geopolitics now. You're in Washington. Trump's administration policies, mass deportations, the issue with the Cuban medical professionals in the Caribbean, the tariffs impact on goods and services in the Caribbean, tropical, I know, heavily affected in this area, and as it involves using Chinese registered vessels. How do we prepare in the region, and particularly, I'm particularly interested in places like Anguilla and the smaller territories, for the backlash from all of this?
Well, yes, Keith. The Trump administration has come into office and is essentially shifting what was the established international order. Free trade, alliances, liberal economics. The Trump administration wants to go in a different direction. The campaign slogan by President Trump, I believe, was Make America Great Again, and also America First. So the policies that we are seeing reflect that to an extent. The Caribbean, as well as the rest of the world, is trying to adjust to this change because the U.S. Is so dominant politically and economically in the world. And when they shift, everybody else must adjust. In the Caribbean, we will have to certainly figure out how to respond because the tariff wars that are happening now, they are going to impose a huge cost on the goods that our people consume, which we import primarily from the U.S. Then the geopolitical aspects of this are that, the U.S. has a international relations approach where they are seriously tackling their global competitors, such as China. And in that regard, the Chinese vessels that are being used to ship goods and services, that there will be a surcharge on them for everyone, unless there are carve-outs that can be given to certain countries. So CARICOM as a bloc for the Caribbean will have to come together to engage. And I note that the Secretary of State, Rubio, did travel, Marco Rubio did travel to the Caribbean, and where he had discussions, I believe it was yesterday. He was in Jamaica, Suriname, and Guyana. And I believe the group of countries that he met with each on a bilateral basis were Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Haiti, Guyana, and Suriname. The base of those discussions overall was about energy security, which is important to the U.S. government. They would like to certainly continue to diversify their sources of energy, and perhaps the Caribbean will be a huge source of that. The other issue is security. We know that drug trafficking, contraband, all of those things are a challenge in our region and as well as the U.S. It's a Western Hemisphere issue that has to be tackled. And then we have, of course, the issue of Haiti and the instability there that requires a hemispheric, if not international approach to resolving it.
And particularly would like to hear your thoughts on the Cuban medical professionals and the fact that the U.S. accusing some of these Caribbean territories of using these monies that they would have paid to these medical professionals somehow being subverted and getting back into and funding the programs of the Cuban government. You would have heard a number of our leaders saying that we want to keep the Cuban medical professionals, and if it means losing my visa to travel to the United States. We've heard that from Mayor Wheatley. We've heard that from some of the other Caribbean leaders coming out very forcefully and defending their right to have relations with Cuba. I just want to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, Keith, I would imagine that this issue came up in the discussions between the respective Caribbean leaders and Secretary Rubio. And hopefully they will find a reasonable way to deal with it. Now, as we all know, Cuba has, over the years, supported Caribbean governments in terms of the functionality of their health systems. The Cuban professionals healthcare professionals are well trained, and they are affordable. And in fact, many of us could not have gotten through the pandemic without those Cuban medical brigades. And since then, of course, many countries have retained some of those Cuban professionals, because of the expertise that they provide. They have very good treatments on things like diabetes, hypertension. That was very different from the way we were dealing with it. For example, we were cutting off the limbs of people when they got to a certain stage in diabetes, and the Cubans provide an alternative where you don't have to cut the limbs of people who are suffering and sick. So there is great value to the Caribbean in the support provided by Cuba for our healthcare systems. And I think the Caribbean countries will be able to demonstrate clearly that there is no human trafficking issue, not at all. But that the relationship with Cuba in terms of medical brigades and medical support, healthcare support, is long-standing. And this should not be an issue of contention, and certainly not feature as a geopolitical lever being pulled on the Caribbean.
And why do you think it's so important then that CARICOM as a bloc and OECS and come together and have a clear foreign policy as it relates to the US or any other grouping or organization or country, and speaking with one voice? The importance of having one voice and a united voice in tackling these myriad of foreign policy issues.
Yeah, the heads of government of CARICOM have been in regular communication on how the Caribbean should respond to the shifts in the geopolitical environment and the changing global economic landscape. So I have confidence that they will be able to do so because those discussions continue. And we all know that there is strength in numbers and strength in unity. So we will be in a stronger position by continuing to engage with each other and present a common front.
One of the interesting things I see coming up in your country, in the BVI, recently was the appointment of a Minister of State. And for folks who have been on earlier with us with Professor Clegg, he thought that was a very interesting development there in the British Virgin Islands. Could you just expound and expand on this for us, please?
Well, yes. Fortunately, under our current constitution, you can only have 5 ministers and 2 junior ministers. Junior ministers were added some years ago to try to accommodate the additional ministerial portfolios, the work in them that needed to be done. So junior ministers were added so that ministers could have a junior minister to lend them a hand. But we continue to see greater need for more ministerial support. And we think that adjusting the political system in this way will better allow us to manage the business of government. In the UK, they have a similar system. You have a head minister over a ministry, then you have a minister of state below, and then, of course, you have under that level a parliamentary undersecretary of state. And in fact, the premier has requested of the governor 2 minister of state positions as well as 2 parliamentary undersecretary positions. This will allow the government, whichever government it is, when that government has a majority and has a need for extra hands to support the ministries, that you will have ministerial posts that you can assign. There will not be necessarily cabinet positions in every instance, but you will have the ability to assign a ministerial portfolio.
All right. Thank you so very much. The UK Overseas Territories Relations post the GMC 2024 in London, the UK having its own financial and other issues to take care of, and not so much time for the overseas territories. I just want to hear your sounding on the UK OT relations post the GMC of November 2024.
Yeah, well, Keith, the GMC of November 2024 was kind of an introductory meeting. New Labour government, they wanted to begin resetting relations with the OTs, so it's introductory in nature. So the agenda and the priorities are still really taking shape. And what has happened is that in the middle of that process taking shape, the geopolitical environment has changed. And so the UK also now has to focus on how it adjusts to the shift being caused by the policy positions of the Trump administration. Of course, international security issues such as the war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. So, yes, there is a lot that the UK has to consider, but we have to still press forward with shaping the OT UK agenda to ensure that we are not left out of the UK agenda as it seeks to respond to international developments. We must remember that we still have challenges with security of our own, crime, transnational crime in the Caribbean is a problem that affects many Caribbean OTs. We also have the climate change issues. As you know, the hurricane season is just around the corner. And the other issue, I think that perhaps has kind of placed the brakes on things is that we've had a number of elections. And in Anguilla, you recently had an election. And congratulations to the Premier and Honorable Cora Richardson and her team. But we also had an election in Turks and Caicos. Premier Washington Missick was reelected. And we will have an election next month in the Cayman Islands. Apologies. We also had an election in Bermuda just a few weeks ago, and Premier, the Honorable David Burt, was also reelected. So with these political developments, of course, we have not been able to bring all of the territory leaders together as yet to have a full discussion about our engagement with the UK. But I believe that as soon as the Cayman Islands election takes place, we'll be in a position to at least have a Caribbean OTs caucus that will then be followed by a wider meeting of all the overseas territories.
Benito Wheatley, I want you to weigh in now on a very important subject area for the folks in the British Virgin Islands. It has to do with your beneficial owners register, the register there, and the need to open the register for public access. I know there's been some pushback from the folks in the BVI on this. Could you just bring some clarity and some understanding of that whole beneficial owners register as it relates to the BVI for us?
Well, Keith, you may recall that at the JMC in 2024, the OTs and the UK agreed that we would establish legitimate interest registers, legitimate interest filters to access beneficial ownership information from the overseas territories. And beneficial ownership information regards the ultimate beneficial owners of the companies that are registered in our various jurisdictions. So we agreed to do that. But as is normal when it comes to policy change, you have to do consultations. So the BVI launched a consultation with our stakeholders to get their views on what is the best way to go forward in establishing these legitimate interest filters. The problem, Keith, is that we have the UK MPs trying to preempt the results of our consultation because they have their own view about what we should do. In fact, they don't want us to have a say. They want to dictate to us what happens. And we have had to push back to say, no, that's not right. In the UK, when the Financial Conduct Authority, their regulator, is going to make regulatory changes, they do consultations. Are UK MPs preempting those consultations that the FCA does in the UK? No, they're not. So why are they trying to do it to us? This is one of the problems that we have with our friends in the UK, with some of them. And we would like to encourage those MPs to have respect for democracy, have respect for good governance. This is all that we're trying to do. We do not want a colonial imposition on us, telling us what we ought to do, regarding an industry that we have run successfully for the past 40 years.
Very interesting indeed. And before I release you, I have two small questions here for you, and I know you'll be able to handle it. The CBI programs in some of these Caribbean territories, namely St. Kitts, St. Lucia, Antigua, and Dominica, citizenship by investment programs. And it appears as though these programs are coming under even more pressure, more serious pressure from the U.S. What have you been gleaning and hearing about this from where you are sitting in Washington, D.C.?
Well, Keith, there are conflicting signals. Because on one hand, there was a leaked list of countries that was published in the papers here in Washington, saying that some of the Caribbean countries, there were concerns about such programs. But officially, as it was mentioned by the State Department, they're saying there's no such list. So it is very unclear what the situation is. But my understanding is that the respected countries you mentioned have made representation to this U.S. State Department to inquire about whether or not there is a problem. And I'm sure the State Department will advise accordingly in due course. But as it stands now, they've said that there's no issue.
I know the BVI has been pushing, trying to drum up some support and seek out and eke out some foreign investment. And they've targeted the Asia and some of the other countries in that area. What can you tell us about the work that is being done and continues to be done by the BVI in trying to drum up and pull in as much foreign investment into the BVI as possible?
Yes, well, in terms of our financial services industry, the bulk of the business is with Asian countries. So we have to continue to go to that market and let them know that we are good partners with them, and also to assess their needs so that we can do our best to meet them from a business perspective. So we continue to be engaged with that market, but we need to go even deeper. Right now, we have a limited presence in ASEAN, and this is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And so we did have a trade mission a few weeks ago where we were able to go to Malaysia. Malaysia is a member of ASEAN, and we would like to use our partnership with Malaysia as an entry point into the ASEAN market. So these are the steps that we have to take to make sure our financial services industry remains resilient. We also are seeking other opportunities for our people that would involve scholarships for training at education institutions in Asia, and any other opportunities for development cooperation that exist. We, of course, are very interested in trade. We want to diversify our trading relationships. So Asia is one part of it, but more so we are looking closer to home, the Dominican Republic and the countries of the OECS. We are going to need to have stronger trading relationships with these countries because the tariffs that are being imposed in the U.S. will make U.S. goods very expensive, which will be a challenge for our people on the ground. So we believe we can reduce that cost pressure on our people by having trade with closer and deeper trade with our neighbors.
So what's your advice for the Caribbean territories as it relates to those tariffs that seemingly seem to be headed in our direction on the back end of things?
Well, CARICOM and OECS have both had discussions about this, and we are agreed that we have to take steps in response to it because food security is very important for our islands. We import everything, and by virtue of importing, it makes it expensive already. And if you add tariffs on top of those shipping energy costs, you can see how quickly the cost of goods and services can get out of reach for our people. So a collective response is what would work best. So I think that is what CARICOM is working on. And I believe perhaps in the very near future, after we have a few internal meetings, we'll be, the bloc will be coming back to the Caribbean public to say what we will do in response to ensure that we have affordable food, reliable shipping, affordable energy, all of those things that are affected by the tariffs and policy of the Trump administration.
Benito Wheatley, Special Envoy of the BVI government and the Premier Advisor on International Relations, with a particular focus on the UK, EU, and the UN, BVI CARICOM Ambassador, Continuing Policy Fellow at the Center for Science and Policy at the University of Cambridge. I want to thank you so very much for your time. Always a pleasure to have you on and to hear your views on this myriad of issues as it relates to your own home country, the BVI, but certainly the wider OECS and CARICOM in general. Thank you so very much, Ambassador Wheatley.
It was a pleasure, my brother. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you so very much. All right, there you had it from Ambassador Benito Wheatley, who is also the Vice Chair of the 40th session of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. He is Vice Chair of the 30th session of the Caribbean Development and Cooperation Committee. He is the BVI OECS Commissioner, BVI Association of Caribbean States Ambassador. So he's very much involved. He's based in Washington, has spent some time, well, quite a bit of time in the UK as well.